This is episode 669 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. And we're recording this episode on December 23rd. We will take 1 week hiatus over the holidays between Christmas and New Year's, but even though it is Christmas Eve, we are here for you talking about the latest issues. We'll also do a year in review in terms of the year 2024. But Merry early Christmas to you and yours, Wally.
And to you and your family, Paul. Hope you guys have a great Christmas.
And of course, a happy New Year 2025. It's the 25th anniversary of the Rio Grande Foundation's founding back in the year 2000.
My goodness, that's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, I joined in 2006, so not a newcomer by any stretch of the imagination, but relatively to the foundation, I haven't been there since day one. But we are going to be talking about some issues that still going on, still worth talking about here in New Mexico before we get into the year in review. And we're going to start with something that, like everything, should be inevitable, although we so rarely get to applaud policymakers for taking courageous stances. But we will go ahead and applaud none other than the Albuquerque Public Schools School Board for taking on the tough decision to close Taft Middle School next year. That is something that, quite honestly, even that they're kind of trying to have it both ways by making it some kind of international school or dual language school. But it did cause some controversy. It was on the margins a slightly courageous decision by the APS school board to take on, some angry parents and teachers there, because the student population is plummeting at APS. Back in fiscal year 2016, they had 85,336 students at APS. As of fiscal year 2025, 64,995. That is a decline of about 20,000 students, and we're barely closing any schools. So what does that mean, Wally?
That means you're going to have too many schools. And, Paul, it is, I'm glad they did this because if things keep on the trajectory and path they're on, more of this is going to be necessary. And so APS is a little bit behind the curve relative to certain other rural school districts, but just because I grew up there, Silver Consolidated Schools, the town is about the same size, but the age of the population is older, and the number of school age kids that go to Silver Consolidated Schools, it's gone down. And that's what we're seeing in Albuquerque, along with, and I think it's doubly accentuated in Albuquerque, is that people are finding other choices outside of the traditional public school system, whether it be charter schools, private schools, parochial schools, and the like. And so, I think more of this will be needed, but these are not easy things to do. Government always grows much easier than it contracts, and that's certainly the case with schools as well.
Yeah, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will. Just taking Silver City, and it's an interesting thing to discuss and to parse out, because on one hand, Americans, New Mexicans are moving towards bigger urban areas.
Mm-hmm.
Albuquerque being by far and away the biggest in New Mexico. So Albuquerque is still growing overall. Rural New Mexico, by and large, is dropping in population. Now, Silver City is a little unique. It's more touristy. It's definitely one of the prettier areas. There's plenty of flat and kind of boring places in New Mexico. So I'm looking at this is just a Google search that I did showing Silver City. It says that they're anticipating a decline in enrollment of about 2% per year through 2029 in Silver City. So that that's a significant drop. Of course, I shared data with you from the National Center for Education Statistics, talking about public school enrollment in New Mexico, which they say peaked at about 337,000 in 2011, and is going to drop by 2031 to 267,000, which is
Mm.
that's a healthy drop. So
Yeah.
they may be dipping their pinky toe into the pool of closing schools. And again, the APS school board is one of the more reasonable. They're to the right philosophically of the legislature. They are a relatively solid school board. So I get it. All of the pressure is in one direction because you have unlimited money. You have no financial pressures whatsoever. I mean, they will tell you, "Oh yeah, we're going to
Yeah.
financial pressures," but realistically speaking, there's a lot of money to be had. So the cost of populate student per student teaching has skyrocketed at APS and is skyrocketing throughout New Mexico. I believe the last data we had was 33,000 a kid, and you're not going. Not that spending more money is going to improve student outcomes in New Mexico, but it sure as hell isn't when most of that money is going to maintain schools that are unnecessary, and you're just putting more money into maintaining aging schools. That's definitely not going to help the kids out.
No, no question about that, Paul. And, it's not surprising that, the Silver Consolidated schools are anticipating slow down, but that is New Mexico. And so it's one of those, we have an aging population. We have a business climate that's not conducive to business growth, which is where younger people would be, one, encouraged to stay here, or two, encouraged to come here. And absent that, this is going to be an area we see, and it's going to be beyond the schools. So, it's a reallocation of resources, something that that government does a really poor job of. And, one of the things, Paul, just again, and just because I think this is illustrative for New Mexico, is like in Greater Grant County, it's amazing how many former businesses that did something else are now rehab hospitals there because, people are in need of such services. Well, that's a situation in Mexico too. We probably need fewer schools per capita for sure, but probably more healthcare. And we're unfortunately maybe failing on both counts right now as a state.
Yeah, and Catholic schools, because they are much more market oriented. They closed Our Lady of Fatima, a Catholic school here in Albuquerque, actually the alma mater of Nella Domenici,
Mhm.
which came up in some of her TV ads. But the Catholic schools have far lower overhead. They're far more focused on doing what they need to do educationally speaking. And here in New Mexico, it'd be interesting to do an analysis of, and we probably don't have the time to die anyway, but we have what how 80 93 school districts, some ungodly number of school districts across our state. It seems like it might not be a bad idea to merge some of those school districts in addition to the schools. Now, you obviously have large geographical areas. You got to have some buildings in certain places, but boy, this is the point is that as population in New Mexico ages and the young people numbers decline, and as people continue to have fewer and fewer children, which shows no signs of changing or changing course, we're going to have these tough decisions made in school districts across New Mexico. And the chances are that they will avoid and not make the decisions. They should have been making these decisions for the past decade as the student population plummeted from 85,000 to 65,000, broadly speaking. And the point is that we are just getting started, sadly.
Yes, Paul, and one of the things that again, just as an example, Silver City has the Silver Consolidated Schools, which means there's more than that. The consolidated just means there's typically more than one high school associated, and in that case, it's Cliff High School. The last I looked, 7th through 12th grade, there's just over 100 students in Cliff. So does it make sense to have its own school board? And obviously, from a long time ago, Cliff's quite a ways distance from Silver City, so they wanted to have a high school, but it doesn't have its all complete administration up to and including the school board. So that may be something that maybe some of the smaller schools in New Mexico would look at as well.
Yeah. Well, it is one of the facts of life that it is less expensive to deploy limited resources over a smaller geographical area than a larger geographical area. And that's something that is going to reverse course here in New Mexico with a vengeance. And we're going to be paying more and more money in order to educate fewer and fewer students. And the question is whether policymakers are going to make the tough decisions that they should be making. And the decision making process should be, in theory, much easier in Albuquerque than in Silver City, simply because Albuquerque is a big city with relatively small transportation requirements. I mean, we're not talking about going from Volcano Vista over to La Cueva. We're talking about a mile or two that people might have to travel extra in order to get their kids to the school. And you just can't have the number of schools that we've had with the shrinking population. And uh, anyway, let's move on to one of the topics that has become a favorite around here. Uh, Seems like we're finally getting some traction talking to people, the media. I have an opinion piece that's going to run in several newspapers across New Mexico on this over the holidays. The governor's whole concept around our great success in reducing child poverty in the state of New Mexico that is built on literally no actual data. And so after having talked about this on MSNBC, and we've called her on it repeatedly, there was a report earlier than that about our child poverty rate improving from worst in the country, 50th, to 17th best in the country. Dan Boyd of the Albuquerque Journal had an article in the paper, Above the Fold. Now, it was a weird kind of Frankenstein article. I don't know what exactly went into it because it doesn't seem like the kind of thing you combine supposed drops in child poverty with tax expenditures, which are taxes left uncollected by the state. But anyway, so here is the specifics of a Twitter conversation I had with Mr. Boyd, and again, he is I'd say the most notable, longest standing Albuquerque Journal reporter. So his tweet: New Mexico spent a record $3 billion on tax credits. Now, we didn't spend it. This is taxes left uncollected. Some of it's more close to spending than others, but $3 billion on tax credits, exemptions, and deductions last year. While some of the tax expenditures have been controversial, they played a role in lowering the state's child poverty level under a new measure. So he's very much, this is Dan Boyd at the height of his political efforts, trying to obfuscate a very simple issue.
Yeah, he had his tap dancing shoes on. Didn't I hear a little tap dancing in this?
Yeah, so there's more. So under the Rio Grande Foundation, I tweeted at him, "Hey Dan, our governor told MSNBC Morning Joe a few weeks ago that New Mexico's poverty rate improved from 50th to 17th. That's not really true, right? She's using different measures." Now, we've talked about this at length. Dan says, correct. There are two different child poverty measures the U.S. Census Bureau now uses. In one, New Mexico ranks 50th, and the other, we rank 17th, which kind of contradicts his previous tweet and definitely contradicts the governor's statements. I've got more on this, but I'll throw it over to you, Wally.
Well, it's just one of those things. It's, which is the more relevant measure? It might be a good question.
Yep.
And so let's do a deep dive on that, which certainly wasn't done on the from the governor's office or from the reporting in the Albuquerque Journal. But then, once it is, at least explain the change.
Yep.
We've gone from it's the equivalent of saying that we're going to evaluate everyone by height, and now we're going to go to weight, and so we're doing much better in one instead of the other. And so, is that necessarily surprising that New Mexico does a little better when it comes to all the government programs and government giveaways? Maybe not that surprising, but the key is at the rate we're going, is that what we want? Do we want to be the number one, social safety net welfare capital of the world in terms of everyone on Medicaid, everyone receiving food stamps, everyone receiving
We
a
may not want
program?
to, but we are.
Well, yeah, that's the key. I think that is the key. Is that's where we're touting that as progress. So is it? Let me just say that from the standpoint, I would accept from the standpoint of a poor family and a poor child to get those programs might help them individually. But does that indicate a success in how the state's being run and what we're doing? The goal would be to get more and more people off of that and doing well because they had a good job and they're going places with regard to their families. So,
Well, Wally, that's why you get paid the big bucks to be on this show, because you are on it as usual. Here's a few additional points that I at first I was just kind of like, okay, this is a load of hooey. The way the governor's saying this, she's basically lying. She's lying, and we need to respond to this. And then they keep lying, and the media doesn't call them on it. So I now have to go down this rabbit hole to figure out what the heck is going on. So here's just kind of a few views from the rabbit hole. First and foremost, I compared. I know this is really getting into the nitty gritty here, Wally, but rather than comparing the traditional poverty rate measure for children and the supplemental measure, I compared the New Mexico supplemental rate to the national supplemental rate. Heaven forbid. I know. Believe it or not, found this information from our good friends at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, who, if you listen to this show, they are the original publishers of the the publication Voices for Children helps put out the kids count report. So they do, I guess they do this for smoothing reasons. So they look at 2018 to 2020. They don't look at 1 year rates for whatever reason. In that 2018 to 2020, which this is a relatively new data point, and for whatever reason, Annie Casey starts with that year. New Mexico and the U.S. were tied at 12%.
okay.
All right. We move on 2019 to
So we were
2021.
exactly at the average.
Exactly. New Mexico goes to 10% in 1921, 19 and 21. The US,
2021.
yes. The U.S. goes to 9%.
Okay.
Then they come back together 2020 and 22. So 2020 and 2022, U.S. and New Mexico tied at 9%. Then the U.S. goes up to 10% 2021 to 2023, and New Mexico stays at 9%, 21 to 23. This is the massive success that the governor is talking about. So yes, we did dive 1 percentage point below the U.S. average in and somewhat improved overall relative to where we started at in 2018, 2020.
Hey, and Paul, to be clear, is this the average per family that they receive 10%, or is this the average of state spending? Or you know what I'm saying?
This is children in poverty.
Okay, so
percentage.
of children in poverty. So the key is our percentage could be at the national average, and our spending as a state could be way higher because we have so many more children in poverty, for example.
Yes, and remember also that Dan Boyd jumped into this whole thing through the tax expenditure discussion, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But a couple of aspects of this. One is the Annie E. Casey Foundation. I know you're going to be shocked by this, but they include child poverty, in their measurements for the kids count report. Which do you think Annie E. Casey includes in their kids count report, the traditional poverty measure or the supplemental measure.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say they're picking supplemental.
Nope. Annie E. Casey themselves in their kids count report picks the traditional poverty measure for children. So not
Oh,
including all the government bennies.
well,
Those radical conservatives over there at Annie E.
yeah,
Casey.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
So we need to start lobbying them to put the better measures.
I think the
make us
governor
look
will
better.
do that
Yeah,
for
exactly.
us, but that's maybe part of the reason. I mean, obviously, there's 16 measurements in the kids count report. Uh, one of them is this poverty measure, and that's one of the things I pointed out is that uh, if New Mexico was really moving the needle in any substantive way, throw out 50 to 17. Just throw out, say if we were doing better by our kids, we should see some of these other measuring sticks improve. And, for example, I cited Mimi Stewart, Senator Mimi Stewart, a few years ago said New Mexico doesn't know how to educate poor kids. Well, if we don't know how to educate poor kids, well, our kids aren't poor anymore. They're now 17th most prosperous kids in the country. They should have been knocking the ball out of the park educationally for the last several years. Well, we know that's not the case. UNM data, the 0 to 24-year-old population is expected to be 550,000 by 2040. That's a decline of 20% over 20 years. We just talked about that regarding APS. People vote with their feet. If people, as families, think that their kids are going to be really well off in New Mexico overall, then they would be coming to New Mexico, or we would see the needle at least turning in that regard. So that's kind of that discussion. I think we've beaten a dead horse, although you never know. Next week we could see another media report unquestionably giving the governor. I'll give Dan Boyd at least partial credit. He's the first one to kind of at least acknowledge that this is not a direct apples to apples comparison. Other media outlets have just let it go. I've been trying to get other media outlets to be even more direct in their clearly stating that we're not talking about a substantive improvement in New Mexico's child poverty. And I will go on the record as saying the traditional poverty measure is better because there is something about parents bringing home the bacon and putting it on the table, whether that's a single parent, whether it's two-parent family, whatever it is. That is an example for those children, and that is the improvement that we need, not just handing families and kids more government benefits. One of the government benefits that was included, that they cited, was the free lunch program.
Right.
I mean, great, but that's not, again, something we can really hang our hats on and say, oh yeah, that is really helping our children lead better lives overall.
And Paul, no reporter's likely to listen to me, but here I'll give you a 3-letter word. Why? So if you see a statistic that is touted,
Yep.
particularly politically, either dramatically improving or dramatically deteriorating, just ask the question, well, why did this happen? And that, in this case, oh yeah, we changed the measure by which we were comparing this thing in New Mexico. That's why it changed. That would have shortcut a lot of this. So,
and now we will move on briefly to the tax expenditure conversation. This is just reported in this same article by Dan Boyd. Let's see, what is the date? December 16th. So he looks at, there's a tax deduction for prescription drugs and medical cannabis, $506 million. Now, this is money that would otherwise be collected that the state does not collect. That is what a tax expenditure is. And we are not, this is one of those unique things where we're not necessarily opposed to or in favor of tax expenditures as a rule.
And Paul, if I could just add real quickly,
Mm-hmm.
I just think the whole concept of tax expenditure at times gets turned on its head. Instead of saying we need to justify why anything is ever taxed,
Right.
This always takes it from the point of view is that everything should be taxed. And if something isn't, we need to analyze that. And in a place like New Mexico, that can get you in a pretty dangerous place pretty quickly. So,
Yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I'm fine with the prescription drug and even the medical cannabis tax deduction. I don't know all the parameters of that. That's not one that we've looked at in great detail, but I don't think taxing prescription drugs is necessarily a good thing. I'm sure this is part of the gross receipts tax policy, and may have to do some more research on that. Food tax, grocery tax, $467 million. Uh, whether that was the optimal policy, I'm not in favor. I'm right there with Fred Nathan, our buddy from Think New Mexico. I don't want to reinstate the grocery tax, although we would be amenable if there was some kind of broad-based tax reform. But just putting that tax back on groceries, certainly at this point in time with the money the state has, is unwise and unnecessary. A tax exemption of $259 million for state licensed hospitals. Uh, Again, I don't know enough about that, but I can't see a good argument for taxing hospitals. Manufacturing services, $140 million. Child income tax credit. There's aspects of this I'm not a fan of, but $130 million. Manufacturing services, $140 million. Working families tax credit. This is not a tax expenditure. This is actual spending. A lot of this, majority of it, $127 million. Single sales factor, $144 million on manufacturing. Fine with that. Film and television, $102 million. Again, this is much more of a spend rather than a tax expenditure. And again, this is why this stuff gets very complicated to the average person. $100 million, $102 million for film. We're opposed to that. Capital gains, personal income tax deduction. That is something we're fine with. We're good with. 101.6 million. And then 93 million medical and healthcare services tax deduction. This is the GRT exemption on that we fought for a few years ago that needs to be re-upped before 2028. We're very much on board with that. So even the term tax expenditure, the film and this working families tax credit are both much more on the actual expenditure side, which again, if you're a reporter, if you're Rio Grande Foundation, and you're disagreeing on the basic terminology, it gets very, very complicated for the average person very quickly.
and it really does, Paul, and to a good point. So you would argue about the definition is that if somebody was paying a tax to the state and had a net bill, and then because of a provision they paid less, that would be a tax expenditure. But a lot of these, like the state's version of the earned income tax credit, a lot of those people aren't paying any taxes
Exactly.
at all. And so putting that on, they just get a refund, but no taxes were ever going to be paid. And so to say it's confusing, yes. And do a lot of people in Santa Fe like it that way? I have a feeling they do. They don't want this to be too crystal clear how this works. So,
Yeah. So a bill passed, unfortunately, in Congress. It's not the year-end omnibus. That one not great either. But the bill that we are talking about is called the Social Security Fairness Act, which I'm just going to read again some tweets from Phil Kerpen, who's kind of a financial analyst guy. He works for let's see, American Prosperity. I'll come up with the name in a minute, but Congress chose to give full Social Security benefits to people who were previously exempt from paying a large chunk of their Social Security taxes because they were covered by state and local government pensions. One of the things in federal law, and I think this was a good thing, is that if your state, like New Mexico, has pensions for teachers or public employees, you're exempted from paying Social Security taxes
and exempted from getting the benefit.
getting the benefits.
Only fair, right?
Right.
But oh no.
Yes. So unfortunately, a bipartisan group, and this goes all the way up to J.D. Vance. So, and I'm going to say right now that in 3 years or so, when Trump's term is coming to an end, There will be a huge battle within the Republican Party over the future of that party. I am much more on the Ron DeSantis side of that debate than I am on the J.D. Vance side of that debate, but that's a debate for a different time. But Vance supported this idea along with Chuck Schumer and the Democrats and some number of Republicans. But essentially, what this bill did is it's going to spend an additional 200 billion with a B dollars to allow people who may have worked a few years in the private sector, but majority of their time was in the government, and it's going to allow those earnings to be greatly amplified on Social Security while they haven't paid uh, the taxes. So it's basically a huge windfall to government employees who shouldn't be in the Republican coalition, shouldn't be a group that the Republicans politically are inherently supporting, giving big political wins. But unfortunately, Republicans went ahead and a lot of them went along with this. Now, here in New Mexico, I sometimes feel a little guilty for weighing in on these debates because we are devoid of Republicans here that we could really realistically influence. Heinrich, Ben Ray Lujan, and all the three Mouseketeers in Congress here from New Mexico, all eagerly signed on to this Social Security Fairness Act. But unfortunately, it is heading to Joe Biden's desk, and it may be one of his last, real substantive acts as president of the United States to sign this into law.
Yeah, and Paul, Social Security is on a bit of a shaky
Just a
grounds to
bit,
begin with.
just a
And
bit.
does this make the shakiness of Social Security better or worse?
What much worse.
I agree, much worse. And so the can that keeps being kicked down the road just got a little bigger if this passes.
Yes. All right. So that is where we're going to end things in terms of where uh, where we are right now. Now we're going to embark upon, and since I kind of have the list of these, I'll throw out something or give a quick description, and we can have a brief conversation. I
Sure.
know we're going to go somewhat on the longer side relative to our typical shows, but we're going to do 2024 in review here. Uh, of course, the biggest thing that we always start pretty much every year with is the legislative session, the 30-day session that took place in 2024. Uh, as is usually the case, it wasn't good, but it could have been worse. Uh, the legislature narrowly rejected paid family leave. However, they embraced the clean fuel standard and 7-day waiting period for guns. They spent too much money and they offered zero in the way of tax cuts. They did not increase alcohol taxes or other taxes. So, yeah, it was a lot of mediocrity in the last 30-day session.
Yeah, a small victory for business, for economic growth and diversification in terms of that Medical Leave Act. And then we voluntarily will pay more for gasoline and diesel fuel going forward because that's what we want to do. And then the 7-day waiting period, a big yawner, because that will impact the timing of people who are probably in all likelihood going to legally use firearms, but the illegal element, no change. So yeah, not a whole lot of impactful stuff from the last legislative session.
Yeah, and on that clean fuel standard, uh, recently the New Mexico Economic Department uh, basically produced or was able to kind of finalize the regulation. Actually, okay, so uh, NMED releases draft rule for clean fuel program. That is December 19th, 2024. So this is a discussion draft. We will include information. I'm not so sure how any public comments, although there's going to be a public meeting held on this. I don't know. Let's see, the in-person meeting Monday, January 6th, beginning at 4:30 p.m. at Albuquerque's International Public Library. a virtual meeting 12 to 1:30 on Thursday, January 10th. You can find information about those on the NMED calendar. But of course, this was passed by the legislature. It's now in the rulemaking process with the Environment Department. I'm not sure what individual comments can really do unless you have some kind of technical change relating to that. But that policy will soon be coming down the pipe. It'll uh, start out when it does get implemented, relatively cheaply, and then it'll start to snowball and become more and more expensive over time. And of course, California just enhanced their enhanced fuel standard, and they said that that was going to increase prices by, I believe, 65 cents a gallon in the not too distant future there. So exciting things to come from these horrendous policies. Uh, Next thing on the agenda, quite honestly, I went all the way to June and the defeat of several moderate Democrats and their replacement with so-called progressives. And Wally, there's always talk among Republicans about their frustration with the Republican Party and their inability to win various races. But when the Democrats continue to go left and further left, it seems to be a pattern that is, regardless of political party, this state, for whatever reason, the voters are bought into this progressive concept. Now, I'd be happy to have you offer any thoughts as to the contrary, but that seems to be the case. So,
My high level take on this is that we're going to, because we have so much oil and gas money, and I've
mhm,
said this before, the impact of a lot of our progressive policies are really not felt at the state government level. Now, a lot of times it's felt by the taxpayers, but it's not felt by the government. We have plenty of government money at the state. And we also, because of that, can just tell people remain calm, all is well. And the second factor is that, at the national level, we saw, a change in direction with Trump being elected because of a frustration with a lot of progressive policies. Also, New Mexico, at times, and I think this may be one of those, we tend to be a few years, sometimes 5 or more years behind these large trends that take place at the federal level. So I think those two factors don't bode well for a turnaround anytime soon, but hope can spring eternal in my case. So,
yeah, it will be. Uh, it's going to be a challenge this upcoming legislative session. Perhaps there may be some, at least because of the combined force of Trump's victory and kind of the writing on the wall aspect. So more of a mental thing that, hey, going too far to the left can have negative impacts, even if we didn't see those in New Mexico. And then the possibility of Trump, one of the big things that I've always complained about is that the federal government tends to act like a drug dealer when it comes to state level politicians. Is that a lot of these crazy ideas that happen at the state level would be a lot less likely to put a lot more onus on state level policymakers uh, if there were not federal efforts to pay the bills for those state level policies. So those may be our best hope, a la Princess Leia with R2D2 in episode 4 of Star Wars. So
well,
we're
another way of saying it is that something that, and it's back to economics in one lesson. If you're receiving money from an outside force for something, you're much more likely to go along with a crazy policy, whether it's a
exactly.
company level tax break or subsidy, or in this case, the feds throwing money down to the states to do sometimes things that are of questionable merit.
Medicaid being one, just the entire way
Yeah.
that program operates. Of
Yep.
course, more recently, California's Governor Gavin Newsom has said that he will offer a state level tax credit for electric vehicles if the federal government, of course, Trump eliminates theirs. I wouldn't be shocked to see something coming from our governor along those lines, which will be the classic case of, again, using oil and gas money to subsidize other, competition and bad policy uh,
But
in that
heaven
area.
forbid we build any charging stations in rural New Mexico. That's just asking too much.
Well,
We'll talk
they'll
them to death, but they never get built.
they'll use our tax dollars, and
Yeah,
maybe they'll build them, maybe they won't.
exactly.
All right, later on in June, Biden and Trump face off in their first and what turns out to be only debate. Uh, the media and Democrats, and I, in parentheses, wrote, but I repeat myself, shift from everything is fine with Biden's mental state to Biden must go, and quite a period there in American history. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's happened this year, 2 assassination attempts on President-elect Trump, Biden's mental decline, etc. But uh, that really was one of the great stories, in my estimation, of the entire year of 2024 was the on a dime flip that happened from the media and the Democratic Party establishment. From, if you question Biden's mental competency, you're part of a conspiracy, you're just throwing things out there that are completely unrealistic and not even worth discussing, to, oh yes, everybody knows Biden is fading fast. His mental capacity is not what it was, and now he must go. But he will still be the president for the next 6 months as of that time,
Yeah,
and he's still the president
he's
today.
good enough for that. So,
Right.
because nothing ever happens at the end of presidential terms on the international stage that you would want a competent president. But yes, that was a damaging thing. And I think the media, what little credibility they had, the kind of traditional media, most of that went away with that. And then Paul, just, I've said this before, but just keep in mind how we got Biden in the first place. Bernie Sanders was beating him in the primaries when they made Bernie quit and basically anointed Biden. And so then Biden is fine. Biden's fine. Oh, Biden's not fine. And now are we going to have a primary or some sort of open process? Nope. We're going to anoint Harris, and she's going to be the candidate. So, for a party that was screaming, this is the end of democracy, they really haven't allowed the voters much input into who their candidates were for quite a while on the Democratic side.
That is 100% true. Fact check, true. Um, then, of course, the first assassination attempt against Donald Trump, July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania. I don't think, you know, regardless of your religious convictions or lack thereof, you may not be a religious person, but some force caused President Trump's head to turn just the slightest amount to allow that bullet to only graze his ear and yet save President Trump's life. So if you call it the hand of God, I will be completely fine. Well, we don't get too philosophical on this program, but that is one where, especially if you think that Kamala Harris would have been a disaster, as I do, for America and the American people, some force caused President Trump, call it dumb luck, just caused him to turn his head to avoid being hit in the head by a bullet from an assassination attempt. I mean, there are turning points in American history, certainly the Kennedy assassination and numerous others, but rarely has there been such a profound turning point that was so narrowly avoided. Because, boy, I don't think you and I want to contemplate the aftermath of that assassination attempt being successful on Trump, and then what that means for American political life moving forward. I think it potentially is very, very ugly.
Yeah, no question about that, Paul. And then the other thing that showed me is, relative to the current inhabitant of the White House, Trump came up with his fists going,
Very
and
true.
Paul, and certainly my knowledge of General George Patton, I've read some books, but I think this next comment is the movie George Patton comparison is, yeah, he has uh, Trump has a toughness that is there, and I think that just showed it. And for a guy his age to get out and do the campaigning he did and talk for hours and hours and hours a day, unscripted, as opposed to what Harris did or what Biden certainly could not have done. It just shows there's a strength in that guy, no question.
Yeah, no doubt, and I'm sure well, I know, remembering at the time, there were a number of prominent people who had probably a tendency or a interest in keeping their mouths shut about their political views, who came out of the woodwork and uh, professed their public support for Trump after that incident. So, uh, possibly, significant contributor to Trump being able to win the election. To what extent, we'll never know. Hopefully, we don't have any more situations like that, and that includes failures of the Secret Service, which really screwed up big time in that particular incident. So, we definitely could have gone down a very dark alternative pathway, in my estimation. There. Very shortly after that assassination attempt, Michelle Lujan Grisham called the New Mexico legislature into a special session, theoretically to address crime issues, although nothing much happened. There was some money allocated to victims of fires in northern New Mexico, and I believe Ruidoso as well. The progressive Democrats ignored her calls for crime legislation. She didn't exactly have conservatives, Republicans, anybody, moderate Democrats, nobody. It was one of those things where all the progressives hated it and nobody else was bought in enough and loved it to the point where they were going to leap to the governor's defense and really push things forward. Of course, New Mexico's legislature is led by progressives, and for whatever reason, the governor didn't do her due diligence before the special session, and it wound up tanking in just one day. Nothing happened.
Yeah, a giant raspberry was heard at the Capitol, and yes, I don't know what she thought. Maybe she just got lazy during COVID, where everything she intimated was put into legislation and passed, no questions asked. But that certainly didn't happen here. The complete opposite.
And then in September, Florida man was hidden by the Trump National Golf Course and was planning his own assassination attempt of Donald Trump. Thankfully, he was caught. The Secret Service did a much better job, caught before a shot was fired. Not nearly as dramatic as the Butler, Pennsylvania incident, but you can just understand that it's now not one, but two assassination attempts. Clearly, Donald Trump has a lot of people who so strongly despise and dislike him that they are willing to uh, come after his life, and that I think says a lot about American politics as it stands now, but also President Trump as a polarizing figure in American politics.
Yeah, and then above and beyond that, Paul, I think that it just shows a potential breakdown in the Secret Service organization, particularly with regard to a presidential candidate. Because presidents, there's always people out there that want to kill the president, no matter who it is. But the both the protection in both of these cases fell on the short side. And then back to the thing. President Trump spoke at many places, sometimes several times a day, and I think the Secret Service, it's pretty clear, didn't necessarily keep up with protecting him in his busy campaigning activities.
Yeah, although at least there was no shots fired at the president. They were able to uh, arrest this individual
Well, and I
before the.
believe the Secret Service actually fired at the individual and just didn't hit him. If the report, if I'm remembering the report correctly, that recently came out. So yeah, it was good. No shots were fired at the president, and the shots that were fired didn't hit anybody, even going the other way.
Right. In October, we can't just talk about kind of negative or kind of challenging and frustrating events, whatever they may be. But one, I think, if you're looking at it from a positive news angle, I do certainly think that there was no bigger and better feel good story than in October, SpaceX completing the launch and then subsequent capture of its super heavy booster. This is, of course, the one that came down into the pincer arms of that launch pad. Just phenomenal stuff. And of course, Elon Musk, the kind of uh, force behind SpaceX, really a company that's doing incredibly groundbreaking things. Obviously, technological advancements happen in our world every single day, and we do benefit from those. And it's often easy to oversee them or to miss them when you're seeing all of the things happening in the world around you. But boy, that was a spectacular thing. And if you haven't already seen the video of it, it's quite amazing to watch. And clearly, the crowd, if you get ones that have the crowd noise available on there, it was a huge winner for the people there watching.
Yeah, Paula, I likened it to the 70s TV show Kung Fu, where he could swat arrows out of the air or grasp an arrow that somebody had shot at him. And if you haven't seen that video, that's worth going to YouTube or your social media of choice and watching that. It was a yeah, it was extremely impressive. So,
Yeah, and then of course we hit November. Obviously the election, but more important for than that locally is President Trump in the waning days of the election holds a rally in Albuquerque. The governor, the mayor, and land commissioner, all Democrats, all conspired at the time to make things difficult for Donald Trump to hold said rally in New Mexico. Of course, a great crowd did turn out. Trump did not win New Mexico in the subsequent presidential election, but certainly, yeah, again, Donald Trump has never proven himself to be anywhere near as vindictive as his opponents have made him out to be. If he were to be vindictive, he would definitely come after this state of New Mexico, which is one of, if not the very most reliant on federal funds states in the country, with chock full of sanctuary cities and other things. So we will see how Trump deals with New Mexico. But uh, not only did New Mexico not vote for Trump, although he did get more votes and higher percentage than he did in the previous election, for the governor, the mayor of the largest city, and the land commissioner to all essentially try to make it impossible for him to have an event really says something about the pettiness of these individuals.
yeah, and the key is it wasn't effective. He had a great event, and it's amazing. Not since the British invasion of the Beatles coming over have I seen anybody, and maybe Taylor Swift recently falls in this category. But if there's a Trump event, people will get there early. They'll do whatever it takes to get tickets, and they weren't successful. But yeah, I do think the pettiness was on display.
Yeah, and then of course Trump does win the election. He becomes the first to win, lose, and then win since Grover Cleveland, one of my favorite of all time. He's not the GOAT, but he's a GOAT. By GOAT, I mean greatest of all time presidents of the United States. So uh, if we can shed some light on Cleveland's uh, time in office back in the late 1800s, he was a great president of this particular nation. Uh, we'll see if Trump and his policies can follow the fiscal restraint and constitutional restraint that Grover Cleveland once did. But certainly a unique moment yet again by Trump being able to lose or win, lose, and then win again the presidency. Grover Cleveland being the only guy to ever do that in American history. That says something again about Trump himself. Republicans take the U.S. Senate and narrowly retain the House. Of course, Democrats, experience yet another good election for them right here in New Mexico. some of the vote totals, some changes happened in terms of that, but this is as blue dominated after the election as it was before the election. Whatever red wave or whatever positive movement the Republicans saw, they didn't see much of it here in New Mexico in real terms, in actually winning offices, which is, I believe, I forget the name of the coach, but Marvin Lewis or some football coach said, "You play to win the game," and if that is the measuring stick, Democrats did their job on Election Day in New Mexico, and Republicans did not.
No question about that, and we will see again whether that changes here in 2 years. There's a lot of things are going to happen between now and then.
Yeah, and then Biden pardoned Hunter, his son, over for a decade of crimes and potential crimes. This is one of the things that I think that some Democrats who defended Biden all the way through the election, and maybe they, of course, jumped on board the Kamala Harris train once Biden dropped out. That kind of these are the guys, the Japanese soldiers after World War II who weren't getting pulled out of the foxholes until the 60s and 70s,
Right.
Which really happened quite often. But these are the folks, even some of them started to bail on Biden when he pardoned his son Hunter after saying that he wasn't going to do it, after the media called it all fake news on the laptop. Lots and lots of things about Hunter Biden that, including Trump's own impeachment, because Trump was one of the things he was arguing about, and it caused him to be impeached. I believe it was the first time, was that he wanted the investigations to happen about the Burisma and Hunter Biden's involvement with it, and why was he getting paid all this money by this Ukrainian oil and gas company when he had no experience and knowledge of it. It was just another instance of the Biden family picking up bags of cash, using Biden's power and office for their own benefit. And I think at least some prominent Democrats kind of said, okay, well, we're not defending Biden anymore.
Yeah, game over on that one. So, yeah, and it was interesting. Not only the pardon, but it was beyond way more than just the things he was charged with for a very long period of time. Which, if you didn't have any curiosity about the corruption possibly involving the former Vice President Biden and then President Biden now, you just are not very inquisitive, is all I have to say about that.
And then concluding 2024, there are things that, of course, happen that are not individual events, or there are multiple events. And now I'm just reading a CNBC article that the Biden administration has withdrawn a student loan forgiveness plan. They had put forth a new plan as recently as, I think, a week or so ago. But looking at this from this limited government constitutional perspective that we are wont to do at the Rio Grande Foundation, again, throughout Trump's time in office, and we have our bones to pick with President Trump on a variety of issues, but one of the main talking points against him was that he was going to just completely disregard the bounds of the U.S. Constitution to do various things, X, Y, and Z. Biden did that time and time again, ignoring a U.S. Supreme Court ruling and attempting to, by himself, offer student loan forgiveness to people who had taken out student loans who, for whatever reason, didn't want to pay them back. Of course, if you ever lend me money and I'm offered the chance to not pay you back, I will gladly take you up on that. But just incredible the way he abused his power time and time again for what pretty clearly was a vote buying operation. And I don't even know how many billions have been paid off and whatnot, but this is clearly unconstitutional for the executive to do this all by himself. The court said so, and Biden continued to do it. And it's really troubling when you have somebody in power who does these kinds of things.
Paul, I agree, and I have a little bit different take on
Ooh.
this because I've always wondered who's really running the presidency, who's making these decisions, and because you asked Biden to explain why he did something. If he didn't have his teleprompter, he couldn't even get out his first thought. And so I have a feeling that somebody with a lot of power in the Biden administration has a lot of student loan debt that they wanted to get take care of. So they just keep putting that back just for purely self-serving points of view. I'm not saying that happened for sure, but it does. The fact that he just kept going and going and going. He was the energizer bunny of trying to do this, which was clearly beyond his legal purview. It caused me to ask some questions.
Now, I don't know if he would do such a thing, but I am very much of the opinion that we should abandon the entire federal student loan apparatus, and that should be done away with in its entirety. There is no reason or purpose to subsidize student loans at the federal level if that is something desired at the state level, as we do here in New Mexico, which I also think is misguided policy, but at least it's within the boundaries of federalism and state-based policy making. While I don't like the policy, if the states do it themselves, that's fine. And of course, if you're sitting here, if Martin Heinrich or Ben Ray Lujan or the three, I don't know what I called them earlier, the three dwarves, the Congress people, wanted to defend New Mexico's own interest, because the state does spend generously on higher education. We've always had low tuition, and now we have no tuition. This is a policy that is going to not help New Mexico whatsoever. Billions in spending. The student loan program and the student loan forgiveness is disproportionately not going to help New Mexico. But because our politicians don't represent New Mexico's interests, they represent the National Democratic Party's interests. They are not going to call BS on this. But hopefully Trump will enact some policies. It doesn't mean that he's anti-intellectual, anti-academic. It means that the federal student loan program is in dire need of reform, and that people, if they willingly take out debt of whatever kind to pay for college, which I don't advise, but if they do, they should actually have to pay it back, and it shouldn't be subsidized by the federal government.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And it's amazing. So we need to reform what we reformed, which is healthcare at the federal level. And here's another one. So it's like the federal government, a lot of things they touch don't work well in the long term. Just this is another one.
All right, well, that is your 2024 in review. We will see you all in early 2025, when I'm sure we'll start to see some bills posted on the legislature's website for the kickoff of the 60-day session. But in the meantime, again, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, and we'll see you in 2025. And thanks again, Wally, for all you do to help make this show happen.
Yeah, you bet, Paul. And Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you, Paul.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.